There we go. Okay, we're off.
It's my friend Lauren. She does technical work. She's in training, kind of like.
Okay, Sal, I think you're good to go.
Okay, well, for anyone who hasn't received the materials for this class, I had sent out what essentially is my term paper, so you know what are my sources of information, and it's a written paper, so you have that in a bibliography, and you also get the slides from the PowerPoint. And if you haven't received that, please send me an email so I can get it out to you. So, and also if you want to be on the distribution, my email distribution list, because I'll send summaries of the class. I want to emphasize that when I talk about the 24 things someone needs to know to understand American history, I begin by talking about world history, because American history is simply a component of world history, and American history does not occur in isolation from world history. And in fact, really the foundation for this nation state that we know of as the United States of America is something that is a product of the human experience going back 200,000 to 300,000 years. So it's important to, I think, have that perspective as we try to dissect what it is we have today. And last week, what I wanted to emphasize is that us humans, having been around for 200,000 to 300,000 years, it's important to understand that the color of our skin was predominantly black and brown. It didn't start to become white until we began migrating out of Africa into colder climates about 80,000 years ago. So, for a long time we existed, and we didn't have a thing of race that we, over time, humans contrived the polygenesis idea. That white people came from one source, black people came from another source. No, the Genome Project has proven conclusively, at least as far as I understand it, that we all come from the same core, and that our ancestors are the ape family. I'm working on a class about the history of Earth, and the organisms that first rose up above water and came onto land are also a part of our ancestry. So, we kind of have some ideas that simply don't hold up in science. So I wanted to establish that a phenomenon that has been at the root of American history, that being racial animus, and is also at the heart of a lot of world history, is not founded upon anything factual. It's purely a contrivance. And it's interesting. There's, one of the tropes against Black people is that they're lazy and they have too many kids and they're irresponsible. Reading a book about civil wars and how they come about, the author is talking about the conflicts, the Civil War in Ireland. And what was a trope used against Irish Catholics? They were lazy and they were irresponsible and they had too many children. So it's the these ways of denigrating people to somehow elevate another population are techniques that have been used many times in many different circumstances, and it's important to not think that they have credibility, because they don't. And so today I want to highlight what, in my view, is a very significant change in the human existence model. For 200,000 to 300,000 years, we survived as hunter-gatherers in small groups, traversing the earth, unrestrained by any kind of boundaries, unrestrained by any nationalism. We simply followed wherever food sources went. We were following nature and surviving. But then around 10,000 years ago, 12,000 years ago, however long ago it was, we transitioned to civilization. And civilization, as a child, I learned that was where humans found their better angels. To be civilized meant that you ate with a knife and a fork, and you used a napkin when it was appropriate. And so you had manners, you know, a way of behaving that was socially acceptable. What I've come to learn, though, is that civilization is the equivalent of brutality, raw brutality, in the interest of those who have power. And so as we transitioned to civilization, it happened when we discovered agriculture. And what happened with, instead of following the herds where they went, we became fixed on a spot where we would now grow food, and we had control then over the sources of food. And it created a sedentary lifestyle, fixed on a spot, not migrating to different places. And so it created an exposure for humans to vagaries in the environment, floods, drought, any kind of environmental hiccup could hurt a person who was fixed on a spot, and then they might be out of food because their crops were failed and all of that. And the problem is that once you went to that sedentary lifestyle, you couldn't then reverse it and go back to being a hunter-gatherer. People who embraced the idea of a sedentary agriculturalist lifestyle, and the environment didn't cooperate, and they didn't have crops to feed themselves, and they were starving, they would look to their neighbors for help. Many people would help, but there's always that small percentage that has an excess of food but won't share it. And when people were starving, they would then attack to get food so they could survive. And it's out of that we get warfare, and out of warfare we get slavery. So what happens is, when you become agriculturalist and you have the ability to create more than you need, you then have an excess. Excess equates to wealth. And when your neighbor is starving and is coming to get your food, and you're not going to share, what that wealth transforms into is power. I have the power over life and death for this person. Do I share the food? Do I not share the food? And so it established the divide between the haves and the have-nots, not something that existed for the 200,000 to 300,000 years prior to that. And it's important, very important, to recognize that. And I don't care what form of history, this is about American history. If you're looking at European history, Asian history, any history, you must understand that this fundamental phenomenon of the transformation of human existence applies to all of those other histories. Native Americans, right? You have to look at this as a phenomenon that occurs. And so this period is known as the Neolithic period, the Neolithic Revolution. And in the PowerPoint slides, you can see I've included a couple of links to, Encyclopedia Britannica to give you some more background about that. And I also included a link to the Khan Academy. The Khan Academy is a digital learning enterprise. It's free. That's provided for students in primary and secondary schools. It is part of the ideas of transforming education to utilize resources like this. I find their stuff to be really amazing. I just think a lot of what they're doing is really quite good. And I included the link there in case you might wish to take a look at it. I also included a link to Delancey Place and a book that appears there. One of their selections was From Debt, The First 5,000 Years by David Graebner. And he is, really a brilliant guy. The author is a brilliant guy. He's done multiple works looking back on history, 5,000-10,000 years. And he does some really very entertaining things. And he talks about what humans were like before greed. So we have, before the current era, we really need a timeline that is before the greedy era. And here are the words of an actual hunter, an Inuit from Greenland, made famous by the Danish writer Peter Freuchen's Book of the Eskimos. Freuchen tells how one day, after coming home hungry from an unsuccessful walrus hunting expedition, he found one of the successful hunters dropping off several 100 pounds of meat for him. He thanked him profusely. The man objected indignantly. Up in our country, we are human, said the hunter. And since we are human, we help each other. We don't like to hear anybody say thanks for that. What I get today, you may get tomorrow. Up here, we say that the gifts one makes slaves, and let me get myself out of the way, and by whips, one makes dogs. Very interesting approach. But that is humans. We got along with each other before we became civilized. It didn't mean there were never any fights. It doesn't mean there was never anything that you would say, oh, that's bad. Of course there were. We come from the ape family. We come from the ape family. But let me tell you, apes really know how to deal with each other compassionately. And they have rules to constrain those who don't behave properly. And we'll talk a little bit about that. Anyway, so let's have a look at our transition, the discovery of agriculture. And now another view of our, there we go, becoming civilized.
Civilization was born on the banks of two rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. Mesopotamia, as the Greeks called it, the land between the two rivers, had few other natural resources. No stone, no wood or precious metals, only water and a rich alluvial soil with which a hard-working people could transform a land of scarcity into a land of plenty. And the other great resource of Iraq was its people. Iraqis are a mixture of Arabs, Kurds, Turks, Persians, whose ancestry goes back to the mysterious people who created the first civilization, the Sumerians. Their character today is still the same as in their ancient proverbs: long-suffering, resilient, hard-bitten, pessimistic. Heirs to a brilliant but terrible history, repeatedly conquered by their neighbors, or brutalized by rapacious military regimes whose conception of justice was an iron fist in the land where law was first devised. Not surprisingly, they were a people who pondered deeply the meaning of life. Iraq is matched only by India as a cradle of religions, rich alternative traditions which have all ended up living side by side. The history of Iraq, then, is rich in splendors and sorrows, the most gifted of civilizations and yet the most tragic, the first attempt by humankind to bring people together in organized societies with a measure of happiness. Another key quality of civilization is continuity or rootedness. The old towns of Iraq are the oldest continuously inhabited on Earth. And it was to places like this, Tel Afar, in the 19th century, that Western explorers came for the first time, looking for origins in the land which the Bible said was the cradle of the human race.
Here at Tel Afar, at the dawn of Mesopotamian archaeology, in 1846, the English excavator Austin Layard, famous for his discoveries at the cities of Nineveh and Nimrud, climbed up here to the top of the citadel one evening. And as the sun set, he says, I looked out and counted over 100 mounds out there throwing their long and darkening shadows across the plain. Each of those mounds had built up over millennia with the accumulated debris of human settlements. The one on which this citadel is built has more than 50 feet of debris extending back 6,000 years. Perhaps nowhere, as here in Iraq, is there such a continuity. And some of those cities, out there in the plain to the south, were among the most famous in the history of the world. Ur of the Chaldees, Nineveh, Babylon, source of some of the greatest tales in our culture. The creation, the flood, the Garden of Eden, the Tower of Babel.
Those stories all come from the magical landscape of Iraq's deep south. Here, on the edge of the great alluvial plain of Sumer, is a wild and beautiful marshland where the Tigris and Euphrates meet. This was the biblical Garden of Eden. Up to the very eve of the Gulf War, it was still possible to enter this world and see a way of life preserved for thousands of years, since long before civilization, the Marsh Arabs. The Marsh Arab villages look much as the first settlements must have done. Man-made islands in freshwater lagoons, where they still live by fishing, raising water buffalo, cutting the reed beds, and cultivating the rich soil along the shores and levees. Their reed houses, some nearly 100 feet long, are still built in the same fashion as was depicted 5,000 years ago in the art of Sumer. In this world of almost limitless potential, the book of Genesis says the first cities arose in the beginning, when God let dry land rise from the water.
First, before I do that, let me get this set here. here. Okay, so I want to highlight that we're looking at the cradle of civilization, where we discover agriculture and where agriculture takes root and the change in the human experience begins. It's also important to recognize that this is where we have the largest oil reserves and conflict continues till today. This is also where the first empire is formed. Empire, what happens is we go to agriculture, starving neighbors attack, we engage in fights, we have warfare, we come, whoever wins realizes that they're vulnerable to attack. So they create a protective edifice, an army, a police, an apparatus to protect their excess from attack by starving hordes. And as you build up that protective edifice, because you're the person who has all the excess equates to wealth. And so you have the wealth. You can provide excess to those who are going to serve in your army and protect you. You're going to treat them so that they have an interest in protecting you. And as you build up that protective edifice, and you look to someone else who's like you, who's also building up their protective edifice, you say, well, my army is bigger than their army, and if I wait too long, their army may get bigger than my army, and maybe I need to have a preemptive attack now while I'm bigger than they are. And so you do. And when you do, you get to take their excess. You attack somebody just like you, they have excess, they have power, you beat them in warfare, you now have their excess and their power gets accrued to you. And you keep doing that, and you are building an empire. And it's important to understand what empire means. Because when British people get that chill down their spine when they talk about, Pax Britannia and building the British Empire, this isn't something to be proud of. This is pure brutality in service of those of wealth and power who are now greedy. So it's really, it's important to understand what the words mean, what the history is behind those words. And so the first empire is the Akkadian Empire. We're going to talk more about that because as this first empire emerges, people start thinking to themselves, we're out fighting wars so that this greedy person can get even greedier, they can get more wealth and they can get more power. And maybe we shouldn't be killing each other because, we're human beings and we existed for 200,000 to 300,000 years playing nice in the sandbox. But now we don't play nice in the sandbox because we're marching to the drum of the person of wealth and power. And the blowback to the empires, first empire comes about, and then there's blowback, and it comes in the form of religion. And we're going to talk about that in subsequent class. But I want to highlight that the place we're talking about, the cradle of civilization, is where the first empire is born. It's also where those stories in the Bible are born, Garden of Eden and all that kind of stuff. It's because this is where the action is taking place, and it is where the seeds of thoughts that will blow back against this inhuman behavior will take root. Let's have another look at how this all emerges. are.
Or was there something else at play? Another reason for the division of the world into haves and have-nots. By 9,000 years ago, the first settlements in the Middle East were giving way to much larger villages. People were only able to live on this scale by becoming more productive farmers. They were surrounded by fields of domesticated wheat and barley. But by now, they also had another steady source of food.
What we see happening about 9,000 years ago is a remarkable transformation in the way that humans are interacting with animals. We begin to see a process of animal domestication, by which we mean humans were controlling where they were moving, they were controlling their feeding, and they were controlling their breeding. Instead of having to go out to hunt, you have a dependable meat supply on the hoof year-round around your site, rather than being subject to seasonal variations in wild game.
As well as meat, animals could be used for their milk, providing an ongoing source of protein. Their hair and skins could be used to make clothes for extra warmth. Over time, domestic animals became an integral part of the new agricultural way of life.
We know that the communities which first started to have domestic animals already had cereal crops, so they were cultivators. And the combination of these particular animals and the plants becomes an extremely attractive package in that they're complementary. After the harvest period, animals could be turned out on the stubble and they can actually eat the remains of the cereal crop harvest. In their turn, animal dung can be used to provide a sort of a fertilizer for the cereal crops as well, for crops. So the whole package, is seen to be mutually beneficial, both for the animals and the plants, and of course for the humans.
Goats and sheep were the first animals to be domesticated in the ancient world, and were eventually followed by the other big farm animals of today. All of them were used at first for their meat, but they all proved useful in other ways, especially with the invention of the plow. Before the Industrial Revolution, beasts of burden were the most powerful machines on the planet. A horse or an ox harnessed to a plow could transform the productivity of the land, allowing farmers to grow more food and feed more people.
And so what we have is we discovered agriculture and we could now grow food. We then discover that we can domesticate animals. Animal husbandry becomes a part of the human experience. And animal husbandry means not only that we have a source of protein, a regular supply of protein, and we can control it. We don't have to go hunting for it anymore. And we can apply it to work. We can hook up a plow to the animal and use it to dig the ground for our agricultural purposes. This is what we now discover. Now, this now becomes a model. This becomes a model of what can be done. We can take these animals and we can have them perform work for us. Mind you, it's not going to take very long with warfare going on because we got to build the empire and all of that. When you have warfare, you're going to have someone wins and someone loses. whoever loses becomes the vanquished in war. And what do you do with the vanquished in war? Well, for a long time, we simply killed them. But then they decided, someone said, the idea had to come to someone, we can enslave them. We can put them to work on the farm in agriculture. We can now use these humans the same as we use the animals. It's important to see how these things, these ideas take root and then they get applied later on and become a model that gets used time and time again.
In New Guinea and many other parts of the world, people never used plows because they never had the animals to pull them.
The Fertile Crescent is in the middle of a huge landmass, Eurasia. There were plenty of places for farming to spread. And crucially, many of those places were to the east and west of the Fertile Crescent at roughly the same line of latitude. Why is that so important? Because any 2 points of the globe that share the same latitude automatically share the same length of day, and they often share a similar climate and vegetation. Crops or animals domesticated in the Fertile Crescent were able to prosper at other places along the east-west axis of Eurasia. Wheat and barley, sheep and goats, cows and pigs all spread from the Fertile Crescent, east towards India and west towards North Africa and Europe. Wherever they went, they transformed human societies.
Once the crops and animals of the Fertile Crescent reached Egypt, they caused an explosion of civilization. Suddenly, there was enough food to feed the pharaohs and generals, the engineers and scribes, and the armies of people required to build the pyramids. The same is true of European civilization. From ancient times until the Renaissance, crops and animals of the Fertile Crescent fed the artists, inventors, and soldiers of Europe. In the 16th century, the same crops and animals were taken by Europeans to the New World. At the time, there was not a single cow or ear of wheat in all the Americas. Now there are 100 million cattle in the U.S. alone. And Americans consume 20 million tons of wheat a year. Modern, industrialized America would be unthinkable without the spread of farming from the Fertile Crescent.
And so it's important to consider become models that get applied in many cases. So we have this model of, using animals to do work. We then apply it to using humans to do work. We have this model of agriculture, and after we deplete the soil in the Fertile Crescent, we then start spreading out. We take the model with us, and the model spreads across the globe. And the same phenomenons keep occurring. The model, as it spreads, the model gets brought with it, so that you know, when we look at Native Americans on the North American continent, who were not there in the Fertile Crescent, they probably passed through the Fertile Crescent at some point in time over the 80,000 years of migrating out of Africa. They may have crossed along there, and then they went into Siberia, and then they crossed into North America. And all of that happened before the Neolithic period. But when they get into North America and they're here for a period of time, the ideas of agriculture eventually emerge. They're here, the natives are here for about 20,000 years, and about 10,000 years ago, we get the discovery of agriculture, and then that model comes along, and so the Native Americans adopt that model too, and they also have warfare, and they also have slavery. So this phenomenon keeps going on. We're going to also see how when Europeans want to invade Africa, and they're trading for goods, that they will want to go into Africa and create slave operations, but they're not allowed to. So what do? They go to islands off of the coast of Africa, the continent, and they then create a plantation business model, which, as they open the New World, what do they bring with them? That model, that business model. It's very important to see these models taking place. So hunter-gatherer transitions to civilization, and it introduces the human experience to excess, wealth, and power. Now, in today's political discourse, everything gets labeled as right or left. What is excess, wealth, and power? Is this a left thing, or is this a right thing? We talk about, is it protecting property, or is it callously letting humans starve? By the way, before the Neolithic period, we don't have a concept of property. Our human existence model does not have a concept of property, of possessions. Yes, there would be fights between people, but remember, we were existing in the world with Neanderthal. We didn't want to get in fights. Why didn't we want to get? Because Neanderthal would crush us like a bug. So we wanted to find ways in which to be conciliatory, collaborative, cooperative. When we went on a hunt, it wasn't one person, it was a team of people working together. You know, that idea, we're all in this together. But then we get civilization, and we get warfare, and we get slavery. Still not connected to a political ideology. Origins of slavery, I'm sorry, equated to excess. Karen Armstrong, noted historian, religious historian, and quote from her: "But in societies that produce more than they need, it is possible for a small group to exploit this surplus for its own enrichment, gain a monopoly of violence, and dominate the rest of the population." And I have links there about slavery and antiquity, if you wish to read more about it. Established by force and maintained by military aggression, warfare was essential to the agrarian state. When land and the peasants who farmed it were the chief sources of wealth, territorial conquest was the only way such a kingdom could increase its revenues. Warfare was therefore indispensable to any pre-modern economy. The ruling class had to maintain its control of the peasant villages, defend its arable land against aggressors, conquer more land, and ruthlessly suppress any hint of insubordination. And so, when we look at people who are losing power, takes on in the human existence model over the past 10,000 years, power is essential. And so when we look at societies where people who were in power are losing power, they'll do everything they can to hang on to it. They will tear down the countries. They will destroy themselves to simply not give up power. When we looked at the Arab Spring and the blowback to the Arab Spring, why was there such fierce blowback? Because people were going to be losing power and they weren't going to give it up easily. In Iraq, we were going to bring them democracy. And for the power apparatus in Iraq, which was the Sunni minority, that they were giving up power, where do you think the insurgency came from? That was it. They were losing power. The communist countries that existed before the fall of the Soviet Union, when the Soviet Union collapses and all that apparatus of communist power, those in power were now going to be kicked out. They weren't going to give up. And so we've had the turmoil that has persisted. The protective edifice used for attacking others with excess and power. Because remember that saying, to the victor goes the spoils.
Every time you have civilizations develop in the world, what you have is warfare and bloodshed. Because other people want the stuff that you've got. And that becomes a part of the history of civilization.
Around 1500 BC, standing at the prow of a flotilla of ships, Pharaoh Thutmose I led his troops to war against the Kushite kingdom. Thutmose I, not born of royal blood, had served as a general to the previous pharaoh and earned a reputation as a formidable military strategist.
For the Egyptians, Nubia was a very strategic location.
What we see is Thutmose going very determinedly to the south, and he sacks the city of Kerma. To sack the capital city of this kingdom was truly a feat. The Nubians were well-known warriors and fighters. There are stories of thousands of captured prisoners of war being executed in a variety of different ways.
Lest anyone doubt the finality of the conquest, Thutmose strapped the body of the fallen Nubian king to the front of his ship. Egypt is the chief, he declared, while peoples across the whole earth are her servants.
Nubia became a second part of Egypt.
The 18th dynasty is really a period of time when the Egyptian presence in Nubia expands.
For 400 years, the people of Kush would struggle under and against Egyptian rule, while Egypt plundered the kingdom's gold mines through annual tribute. Kushite royal tradition survived south of the regions that Egypt ruled.
And so all of the, as I look at history of warfare, it pretty clearly becomes where you're never told, I'm doing this, we're doing this for my increased excess wealth in power. It's always disguised behind something noble and honorable. But I'm suggesting to you that when you look at the histories behind these things, what you find is it's being done for excess wealth, power, and greed. And so, for those of you who have been traumatized by my graphics in the past, here's another one. just to kind of give some sort of a linear idea to it, we have hunter-gatherer transition to agriculturist, pastoralist, which is animal husbandry. We adopt a sedentary lifestyle. We get introduced to the ideas of excess wealth, power, and greed. Droughts, floods, etc., cause issues, and we have starving neighbors. When those of power refuse to help, they realize that in that refusal, they have power. And so they have fights, and we then get slavery. We create a protective edifice of police and armies. The protective edifice is then deployed later on to attack others who have excess and to fight their militaries. So we can then take we transform their excess into the spoils of war. And so we then get the human existence model becomes invasion, occupation, enslavement, rape, and murder. So what I'm suggesting here is that we've now introduced, this is a thing of the human existence model, that it is going to involve invasion, occupation. When you look at Columbus's journey to come and discover the new world, no, his mission was to go invade, occupy, enslave, rape, and murder, and that is precisely what he did. And then morality comes about. Ideas that, wait a minute, this is nuts, and this precedes religion, but that religion then comes into existence and codifies morality. So hunter-gatherer sequence, we find ways to store grain about 12,000 years ago. We discover how to plant seeds 10,000 years ago. Animal husbandry around 9,000 years ago. We adapt the sedentary lifestyle. We discover excess wealth and power. We get starvation, and we get warfare and slavery, and empires start building about 4,500 years ago. For modern day issues, excess wealth, power equals the power human existence model. Is it moderated by government? Is it moderated by religion? It creates an issue between what are clearly disparate interests, the common good versus personal gain. Are we all in this together? Or are we all in this together in service of one? The wealthy look to government when they're affected by a natural disaster or a financial collapse for relief. Think about the crash of 2008. But condemn the unwealthy when they look to government for help. Think about the people of excess who would not share with a starving human. Is there a limit to what a human will do for excess wealth and power? Think about you look at the lands of America, what made them attractive? It was that rich, fertile soil. And someone came along and said, there's a lot of wealth we can extract out of that soil. That's some good soil. There's a lot of riches to be gained from there. But to do it, we're going to have to enslave people. And we're going to have to implement a brutal system so that they will work that soil and extrapolate our wealth and our power. Question, do the powerful today deny food for the hungry, shelter for the homeless, healthcare for the sick? What the hell is America arguing about healthcare? The rest of the world has already come to a conclusion about it. We're sitting out here, oh, no. We need a healthcare industry that we can make profits from. Think about that. Is this not the same as 10,000 years ago? we honor the unselfish who risk their lives for others. Think about when COVID first started. We were out there applauding the healthcare workers every day. But we also honor the selfish who accumulate more and more wealth at the expense of others. And don't think that the blowback against all that good feelings for healthcare workers, that people who were threatened by that then instigated others to go out and demonstrate against healthcare workers. We have healthcare workers being attacked for helping people with COVID. Did they know it was wrong 10,000 years ago? Before religion, I'm talking religion as we know religion today, before political ideology, before nation states. Hunter-gatherer peoples conditioned for cooperation. Hunter-gatherer, we were cooperative. We worked collaboratively. We're vulnerable to compliance in the face of power. So here we are, us humans were, kind of acclimated to being cooperative. But then along come those who found a way to become greedy. We were vulnerable because our natural disposition was to cooperate. So we would cooperate with this person who is now claiming to be the leader. We would go marching off until finally, thousands of years later, we say, wait a minute, there's something wrong here. People of power established the society. They controlled who received benefits from the society and who did not. Today, power controls the society, even though many people believe that people hold the power. Here I extracted an excerpt from a book by Franz de Waal. He's a biology professor. He's professor emeritus at Emory. He's deeply involved with the Yerkes Center, and he's very well known. And this is from his book, The Bonobo and the Atheist, in Search of Humanism Among Primates, because he studies our ancestors. Chimpanzees and bonobos respect each other's possessions, so that even the top male may have to beg for his food. The most powerful may have to beg for his food. It is rare for dominant individuals to take another's food by force. And code violators meet with fierce resistance. Hunter-gatherer cultures revolve around community and sharing, and stress humility and equality. They frown on anyone with a big mouth. Western societies, in contrast, celebrates individual achievement and permits successful individuals to hold on to their gains. In such an environment, humility can be hazardous. And this from a French economist. When plunder becomes a way of life for a group of men in a society, over the course of time, they create for themselves a legal system that authorizes it and a moral code that glorifies it. Now, let me say, I have no admonition for anybody who's successful and becomes wealthy. God bless. What I am, I guess, railing about is when it means exploiting and creating an environment that's inhospitable for other humans to exist. And that, when you cross that line, then for me, it becomes immoral. Okay, we can open up now for comments and discussion. Lauren.
Okay, I'm working on it. I'm getting you.
I'll be right back.
Yeah.
Well, she heard this before, so yeah.
Yeah, no, I was here.
I'm just kidding.
Don't be a smart aleck. Okay, so we're going to use the raise the hand feature. And people can unmute themselves at that moment. And I know that Sal's been racing through history. Oh, here we go. There's start my video. We can start your videos again. And I know Sal's been racing through history, so you may have some questions about what he's just trampled through. And if you're having problems with muting and unmuting, put it in the chat and I'll see what I can do.
Yes, Maxine is trying to get our attention.
Good. Yeah, I'm asking her to unmute. And I don't know why.
There you are.
I just want the attention. I didn't have a question. It dawned on me that maybe overpopulation started because of agriculture. And that is one of the problems we're really having to battle with now, and creating even more complex and dubious thinking about having more people to take care of the older people. I would wonder if that makes any sense to you.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think you're precisely right in that what happened is, as the food supply, once we realize how to grow seeds and do that sort of thing, the food supply expands. And when you have an expanding food supply, you can have an expanded population. And for, you know, again, this transition from hunting look, I have more food, I have more confidence that I'll have food, I will have more children. And not only does having more food accommodate for people who want to have children, it also says, and if we have more children, we'll have more people to work the land. So you know, the cycle continues. But and let me say that one of the thought processes that, you know, when you look at all the problems that have come about in the human existence, you then get to a point where Karl Marx says, wait a minute, this is all bad. Look at the starving children in the streets of London. And he comes up with thoughts that are really a lament for going back to hunter-gatherer. I mean, really, when you listen to Marx go on, what he's talking about is recreating the hunter-gatherer society, each according to their need, each according to their ability.
It makes sense. I think the planet would be in better shape.
Well, it might be, but the problem is there's no, once you've gone down that road, you can't make a U-turn.
Well,
you know, you can't go back to hunter-gatherer. We would not be able to have the amount of food that we need for the population that's now here. So, you know, it's an interesting idea, but it's not pragmatic. So you then say, well, if that's the case, what could we do? Well, the idea, I mean, I think capitalism and systems like it are certainly applicable to the modern day. But how do you put constraints upon it so that it is still something that functions not just for a selected few, but for everyone? And that's where I believe we get into the issues between, do we have a government that is there for the common good, or do we have a government that is there for individual gain? When you look at, and we'll get into this as we get closer to America specifically, but the thoughts of Montesquieu, who was really the key theorist behind the Constitution and all of that, he talks about that the government officials, he comes up with the idea of, he didn't come up with the idea, he's copying England, three branches of government, but he refines the thought to an extent. But his key point is that the people in government have to be insulated from corruption.
Ha. Oh, yes.
Because they have to serve the common good.
Yes.
And now, I mean, the common good isn't even an issue. So, your point is a good point, and I think it really highlights the changes that came about 10,000 years ago, and where we are today, and what are some of the issues we have to deal with.
But there's just a comment on that, if I may. My name is Cedric here. In a way, it's self-correcting, because when there is sufficient food, population growth tends to slow down. And so that's what we've seen in China. We've seen it less so in India, because there's less wealth and people are still poor, but certainly even in parts of Africa. So there is a sort of a self-correcting mechanism that can take place, I think. And I don't know.
Well, yeah, but I'm sorry. My point is just that on the scale, you can, but we can't. I think the idea that we could somehow reverse to a society that was more along the lines of hunter-gatherer would be not plausible.
I agree. Yeah. But it was a comment on the population growth.
Sure.
Of Maxine. Yeah.
Minty, you have a question?
Yes. First of all, I want to mention that on PBS tonight, there's going to be a program on how the Antarctica, especially, was a swampland, a tropical swampland at one time. Dinosaurs were freaking around, running around there with alligator types and everything in the swamp instead of being frozen over in ice. So I just want to bring that to everybody's attention. But the other thing is, so Sal, are you saying that everything started in the Nile Valley? Or are you saying that simultaneous to the Nile Valley, there was a similar upstart civilization in Central America with the Mayans and they were later, the Mayans and the Aztecs? What makes you think all this didn't start in South Africa, for example? Why did, what leads you to believe that it all started in the Nile Valley, period?
Well, just that, as you know, nothing that I say is something that's original in my brain. It's only what I've read from historians and others who will say that the discovery of agriculture was in the Fertile Crescent, that's where it begins. And then it spreads, as you can see in Guns, Germs, and Steel. He's highlighting how, Jared Diamond really does a good job of talking about it in his book, Guns, Germs, and Steel, that what happens is they deplete the soil, and then they're forced to move out of that area, and they go across the same latitude, so that the conditions are the same, but they bring the concept goes with them. Yeah. And so, the phenomenon, once the Aztecs and the Mayans and the Inca discover agriculture, once that technology reaches them, they follow a very similar path. And they do have enslavement and warfare and all that goes with that. Yeah. I think Gail had her hand up.
Gail did have her hand up, right?
She might have had to leave.
Do you have a question, Gail?
Let me unmute. Yeah. Well, it was kind of an observation. A couple things. One was that I didn't I can't picture what you were referring to, that healthcare workers in the States were honored and made into heroes, and then a resistance arose of demonstrations against healthcare workers. I can't think what that was.
Oh yeah. In fact, my next class is going to be about propaganda and psychology, and I have clips that I'm going to show there about anti-vax people who were COVID deniers, attacking healthcare workers as they would be coming out of work or as they were working.
Right.
I mean, physically assaulting them.
Right. I hope that's not a movement, just a few aberrant small incidents. But God, yeah, right.
Yeah, no, you would hope so, but from the things that I read a lot of, it's not isolated by any stretch of the imagination. And in fact, we now have a problem that healthcare workers are leaving the job
because of that.
Because there's been too much of that.
Got it. Okay. And can I just ask one other question?
Yeah, sure.
So Montesquieu was the model for the theorists for the American Constitution, but also a point that I think you brought up, I had never thought about it before, but in fact, the Native Americans also, before we did, had a similar model that was used as a model for the American Constitution, 3 arms of balanced government and all. And so different idea arose, and the same idea arose in different places at different times, perhaps.
Yeah, no, you're right. The Native Americans really preceded American democracy. And in fact, American democracy was informed by the Native American political structures. But yeah, no, we certainly when we're in the 18th century, there's a power fight between the monarchs and the industrialists who are starting to emerge. Who's going to have power? And so the monarch had all the power. Now you're seeing forces are saying, we want to distribute that power. And because the more distributed it is, it gives the sense of, all right, reason will prevail. We kind of have that sense that, we have the Supreme Court, we have the legislature, we have the executive branch, and they all fight it out, but that something moderate will come about. The middle will prevail. That is, unless you have corruption. And if you have corruption, then you can take control over the Supreme Court. You can take control over the legislature. And even if you don't have control over the president, it doesn't matter. If you got 2 out of 3, you can quash the president. The president is only there to execute the laws that are enacted. And, it's Montesquieu isn't even talking about the illegal corruption. He's talking about things that would be legal. Like, for example, if I'm on a council, city council, and we're going to put in a new road, and that new road is going to benefit my business, well, I'm supposed to step away and not be involved in that because it would be serving my personal interest. George Washington was angry during the Revolutionary War that a new road was being put in, and it wasn't being put in close enough to his property because he wanted to benefit from it during the Revolutionary War. So, the idea, really, Montesquieu's thoughts were, you've got to insulate the people who are governing from corruption. And, you can think about it in terms of, let's just say the Atlanta Falcons, it's okay for them to take the NFL referees away for a weekend down to Boca Raton, where they'll, in the middle of winter. Right now, we're in January, the Atlanta Falcons are going to take all the referees down to Boca Raton for a week with their families, and they're going to pay the whole bill. Nothing wrong with that, right? That is, unless that referee has to make a call against the Atlanta Falcons. I mean, we wouldn't stand for that if we were talking about football. But we will when it comes to healthcare for the whole country. I mean, okay, I'll be quiet.
Graham, do you have a question?
No, I just had a quick comment about the idea of the healthcare workers, it being isolated or not really widespread. Because I was just down at, a very highly regarded, famous hospital here in Lakey just recently. And they had to call in the Burlington police for a week because a bunch of these crazy anti-vaxxers had come armed to the hospital, climbed up on the roof, and put up signs, physicians are communists, and threw rocks at their cars and at them going in and out because they wouldn't provide that Vermexin, the horse drug, to these people who wanted to give it to their families.
Yeah,
so it's going on everywhere.
No, and it's important to understand this is not an organic movement. This is not people who just they believe so strongly in this that they're coming forth to do that. This is organized by people who have been organizing, tearing down the American government for 70 years. They have an apparatus on the ground to organize people to not get vaccinated against a disease that will kill you. They have an organization that is out there to go to school board meetings and scream about critical race theory. The people screaming about critical race theory have absolutely no idea what critical race theory means. They could not read a journal article about critical race theory and understand what it said. But they are out there, they are threatening school board officials over it. And it's not because it's something organic. It is because organizers have brought them together and instructed them how to wreak havoc with the system. So understand this, there is a very formidable force in the country that is determined to tear down government. And by the way, what you're watching now with the Supreme Court, we got abortion and we got can Biden issue a vaccine mandate, all of it. This court's agenda is to unravel the federal government.
They're doing a good job.
And what they want to, look, when Kavanaugh is asking questions during the abortion case of shouldn't we leave this to the states?
Yeah, right.
This court wants to recreate the Articles of Confederation. And if you're not reading that, you're not understanding what's going on. And it fits within an overall history of power, of wealth, of dominance, of greed. Charles Koch does not want to answer to the Environmental Protection Agency. Charles Koch does not want to answer to the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. Just put that all back to the states. So you instead of having one government, you have 50. That's what we had in the Articles of Confederation. Americans, if you want to celebrate Americanism, pay tribute to the West Indies. Because if it wasn't for the West Indies, England would have crushed America like a bug. We could not fight them. The problem was that they were far more interested in the West Indies than they were in these 13 colonies. We were irrelevant. They weren't making money out of America. They were making money out of Barbados and Jamaica. And so England said, the hell with them. We don't have time for them. So America ought to pay tribute every year to the West Indies and to India and to China, because that was higher up on England's list than the 13 colonies.
So, do we have any more questions? I don't see any more raised hands. Eileen, did you have something?
Just a comment. Please, Sal, do not tear your hair out. I thought you were going to try and do it for a minute, and I got very nervous. It's so lush.
Well, I want you to know, though, I have remained true to my commitment that I made to Suga when I first started teaching here, which was I will not get a haircut until COVID is gone.
There you go.
I won't have a reason to get a haircut until COVID is gone, you know. But no, I mean, we really need to understand what's going on with these things around us. The whole idea from Montesquieu was government for the common good. And mind you, England had gone through civil wars and battles between, you know, the monarchy and parliament and all of that stuff. So when Montesquieu writes his thing, it's after observing England for a couple of hundred years and then coming up with thoughts to say government ought to be there to serve the common good. Imagine if we did have a government that was serving the common, and that's not to me. Look, that doesn't mean that people can't get wealthy. Look, we had wealthy people in 1950. But we also had a middle class. Now we don't. And so, you know, it's really, it's where are the boundaries? And government was really sabotaged for 50 years. You know, when the John Birch Society has been, you know, a lead weight around the all the racist stuff is a lead weight around the country. George sent me a video of a guy who was speaking to the Kiwanis maybe a month ago, and he was talking about Atlanta and how successful Atlanta was in business. And he said, you know, really Atlanta shouldn't have been the one to succeed. It should have been Birmingham. It should have been Memphis. But why were they were still fighting race crap? And Atlanta said, we're too busy to hate. Now, you know, Atlanta has had its problems, but you really had a priority placed on we're going to do business and we're going to set aside this racial animus stuff. And you know, you can look through different administrations and see it ebb and flow, but overall, really, Atlanta has done very well financially because it became an inclusive, diverse city. You know, as I was mentioning in another class yesterday or whatever, you look at Yugoslavia under Tito. What did he do? He created a diverse society. You know, when people started raising ethnic kind of tensions, he crushed it. And you had a thriving, prosperous country. And he could even thumb his nose at Stalin and the Soviet Union because he was doing very well. He didn't need their help, thank you. And so, and then he dies, and and then the forces that, you know, were losing power then tore the place to shreds. You know, it's just a matter of, if you're either serving the common good or you're serving the interest of a few people. And, you know, we need to be cognizant of where we are.
Okay, well, I'm going to ask everyone to unmute so that we can give Sal a little round of applause.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you for coming. Hope you're getting something out of this. Next week,
we're enjoying it.
Next week, we're gonna look at religion. Now, when I say, I want you to understand, when I talk about religion, this is not a theology class. I'm not talking about, you know, challenging faith or belief in God or anything like it. It is just that historically, humans believed in what we refer to as the pagan gods. We've always sought transcendent. As humans, we looked around us for 200,000 to 300,000 years, as long as we've been around, and we said, what the hell are we doing here? Why are we here? And so there was these thoughts about a transcendent power. But the ideas of God as we understand them today didn't come about until 4,000 years ago. And they didn't, and when Abraham revealed his thoughts, the whole world didn't stop and transition to monotheism. It took thousands of years. So I'm really talking about historically what was surrounding this phenomenon of monotheism. And it's not just the religious side. It also comes with a moral code, which I'm arguing is blowback to the Akkadian Empire.
That's why I subscribe to it.
So we'll be talking about that next week.
So then you have to come next week?
Thank you, everybody. Be safe.
Bye. Thank you.